Hey, how's it going? This is Atlantic Bushcraft Adventures. Today we are talking about saws versus knives, or saws versus axes, and this is episode 203. Normally, Robert does the intro. He asked me to do it just to throw me off, I think, but that's okay.
Kinda. I like to put you on the spot, keep you on your toes, see what you do. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I just like to see the reaction sometimes.
I keep thinking of the first time you left me alone online. Anyways, today, we're going to talk about axes and saws. There's a few other things I'm sure we're going to bring up, but the reality is this is a debate you hear a lot. And I've had this conversation a few times in the last couple of weeks with people. And I know we've briefly talked about this in the past, but we checked. And despite both our best thoughts, this was not an actual full topic that we've covered. Uh,
No. And when you first mentioned it, I was like, yeah, it'd be a great topic. But I'm like, I know we've talked about that. And I went through, and funny enough, I was doing, I archived all our episodes. So I got to go through and see what every single episode title was in the description. And we never actually done a title on this.
so here it is. Did not ask, but you will receive.
But it is actually
So,
a pretty good debate, in all honesty. And I mean, it is a debate, but the truth is, I mean, if you want to get right to the nitty gritty, they both have pros and cons. Both have uses and things they're great at, not so good at, and there's a lot to it.
to me, they're the same tool in look at it as they're a wood processing tool. And at that level, they are the same. But outside of that, they both process wood in such a totally different manner that they're not really interchangeable. But sometimes people treat them like they are. And the why this even becomes a debate sometimes is whether you're trying to go as light as possible, what you're doing, and safety. And the first time I heard this argument is, oh, an axe is very unsafe. I only take a saw. It's a much safer tool. And I can see that argument. I can concede that you can get very greatly injured with an axe. But honestly, I have also hurt myself with a saw. So really, anything with sharp edges has its risks.
That's why we're not allowed sharp objects. But no, you're totally right. And like most tools, as long as you take your precautions and do things right, you mediate the risks significantly, regardless of what the tool is, and that's inclusive to an axe as well.
And in the end, what is any tool's real job is to make a task easier and or doable. And so I think we need to break it down into the different functions of what these tools do. And the very first thing I think of with any wood processing tool is felling of trees. So if you're going to knock a tree down, which is the better of the two tools? And I'm going to argue, and I think you could easily counter argue, and this is why I'm going to give you the easy counter argument. I'm going to argue that an axe is better for felling trees.
I can't say no, to be perfectly honest with you. I can't say that it is or it isn't. I know, depending on the size of the tree, I would agree with you. Sometimes to a certain size, axe is
Yeah.
way quicker. Tiny bit more effort, but the time you save outweighs it. You know what I mean? Once you get
Yeah.
to a certain size, you know
Then it
what?
topples
It's
the
a
new
tricky
thing.
question because you can notch better with an axe, but you can't come through with the back cut. You know what I mean? But you can do both with a saw, so it's almost kind of unfair.
But take a buck saw, for instance, or even a like the silky type saws. You know, the one handhold. There's a limit on how much you can cut with a saw. It has to be smaller than the length of the blade. Essentially, you cannot cut a 1 foot diameter tree with a saw much less than 18-inch blade length. It's almost impossible. You
Yeah.
you can work way around the edge and stuff and really fiddle with it, maybe get it done. But honestly, you're going to work like a dog. Now I can cut a 2 foot tree with an axe. It's going to take some time and some effort. And here's the other thing: if I'm cutting with a saw and I don't cut right, there's a high likelihood my saw is going to get jammed in that log. And I know this because I have reliably been able to figure out the point where I can jam my saw because it happens.
No,
And
no,
even if you
it's a prime point. Like the big drawback of a saw is as you get bigger, the potential if
yeah,
you're not even jamming, binding.
binding it up, yeah. And then what do? You get an axe to get your side,
Yeah.
right?
No, it's totally true. And what came to mind the second when you asked the question is, and I thought you were going to go the other way. I'm not going to lie. Even professional loggers, for the most part, will carry a crew axe with wedges. You know what I mean? And that's with a chainsaw. An axe still has a ton of uses around felling trees.
So you're right. If you're falling large trees with a chainsaw, and that's sort of the exception, a 16-inch bar on a chainsaw can go through pretty well a 32-inch tree. There is an advantage there, but you do need felling wedges, and you got to drive those in to keep that opening open. Otherwise, your chainsaw gets into a certain point, and you might as well leave it there. You can just take the bar off and go away with the rest of it. But the bar is staying there, and most of your chain is too. Forget it; it's gone.
Oh, yeah.
I've jammed them in there, and we've had to get another chainsaw to get my chainsaw. Not
We-
very often, and
Small story, I'll keep it brief. It's just very applicable to this. When I was learning to fell trees back when I started doing forestry and stuff like that, I got to the point where I carried a second saw. It would be smaller, but its primary function would be to cut my other saw loose when I inevitably got it stuck. And I mean, this didn't continue on for ages, but for when I was learning, it became a real thing. I just got a second saw, and it kept me from, damaging the first saw and tiring myself out. It was just easier. And that's why I thought you were going to go the other way with it.
I have used a come along to pull a tree back so I can get the side.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right?
I've done everything you can think of trying to get saws back at some point.
So the other weekend I was out camping with a buddy of mine, and he mentioned he had never felled a tree with an axe, and he'd usually use the saw. And he kind of made the comment that he was under the impression that the saw was the superior thing for knocking down trees. And I pointed out there's a big dead tree a ways away. And I pointed out, I said, you could not knock that down with the saw I have here. And I had two saws. I had two Agua cannons. I had the 21 and the 15 inch. And the tree was probably about 18 inches across. And I said, neither one, maybe it was a little bit more than 18, neither one is going to make it through that tree. We could go down and try, but you're going to get so far, and then you're only going to be able to move the saw like a centimeter. And at that point, you're losing any efficiency the saw has. You need long strokes for a saw to work well. And it was dead. It was well dead. Don't get me wrong. So we went down, and I gave him a small hatchet. And he was only at it for 5-10 minutes. 10 at the absolute moment. I have a video. And the funny thing is, he looked like he was getting tired, and I actually said, can I help? And I took 3 more swings, and the tree fell down. And honestly, he did all the work.
So I do have a question, Ben. Are we talking small or small?
No. Like hatchet or a little bit bigger. I think the Condor I have, some people listening may have actually owned this thing because we.
Oh, is that the traveling axe?
Yeah, the traveling axe. Like everyone in Nova Scotia has apparently owned this thing at one point in time. So I saved its life. I took it across the country. Nobody can do anything mean to it again.
We'll get it back to Nova Scotia soil eventually.
So, anyways, this little axe, it's a fun little axe. Did not take long to knock down this bigger tree. Granted, it was partly rotten. It was that dead, standing dead, partly rotten. And we got little more than 3/4 of, we were almost halfway where it just collapsed and fell on its own. And it fell quite well. It was quite a satisfying experience. But it kind of proved a point to him. Like, and you were kind of going on the other side. Like a small tree, one quick snap with an axe, you can knock probably a lot of things from 2 to 3 inches with 1 to 2 hits.
Yep.
Where you would be 15, 20 strokes with a good saw before you're through. And I'll lay a long tree down on top of a stump or something, and with an axe, a couple of chips, I can make my chunks. So, there's a bit of loss, but you can scoop that up and throw it in the fire too, and you can split with an axe.
Oh, you thinking you're so smart.
see your axe versus saw debate, and I raise you a machete.
So my wife, from the other room, heard our conversation. And Ben and I already talked about
I
this,
actually
but
didn't hear you. I just thought I'd bring a machete.
I have one like that.
yeah, this is actually hers. This is the Gerber brand there.
Yeah, I had the same one. So it inevitably gets brought up every time you have this. I just use a machete. Now, a machete is somewhere in between, and a lot of them actually have a saw back. I think that one does.
I think this one does.
It's a horrible saw back, by the way. It is not well done. But it's there. Right.
You want that back? Oh, I can keep it. Thanks.
So a machete has a time and place, and is really common to be used in rainforests down south because you have a lot of quick-growing vines and stuff, and that slices through that great.
That's a more classic machete there.
Yeah. Your limit with that is even a good spruce tree will mess one of those up.
Oh yeah, yeah. They're once again, they have their use. Don't get me wrong. I used to. We were talking about this just before we came on. I used to be a faithful machete user. Didn't carry an axe. Didn't really carry a saw. Carried a machete. I used it for chopping. I just kept my size limited. I could use it for splitting. Like I seen the. I thought it was the best of everything around, and I could still use it for doing feather sticks and stuff like that, like on the inner belly off it. As I matured or progressed, whichever way you want to look at this, I went to just carrying one of each tool, a saw and some sort of axe, which made the machete obsolete.
And I like it. There's times where it's great, but the reality is, say you wanted to cut a nice spruce tree down with that, if you're cutting in a regular softwood part of it, you're going to do a good job. Oh, you're distracted.
No, Mel's walking by and feeding information, and she actually had a good point. So she said area and local vegetation can make a big difference on what you're taking in to process your wood as well. If you're around bamboo and stuff like that, machetes shine. You can get through those really easy, and you can split them and stuff. Machete is like a very multi-tool use there, as we're here, like where we're familiar with hardwoods, softwoods, things like that. You need something a little bit more robust. You're not going to knock down an 18-inch rock maple with a machete.
That's what I was saying earlier kind of dovetails with that. If you were in say Central America, in the rainforest of Amazon, the vines and a lot of the quick-growing trees they're not that dense, you can actually cut through them because they're a softer tree generally. Mm-hmm. But like I said, what we consider a soft tree here, like a spruce, if you hit a knot in a spruce, that's hard. Like, it is shockingly hard at knot. And it will chip and roll an edge.
Oh, yeah, fairly. That machete at this point has been beaten to hell. You know what I mean? It is no longer a pristine machete by any stretch of the imagination. And it was from that. Mostly I used it just for processing wood, and it was from hitting knots. And this is me maintaining it as well. But just over time, like, some good gouges have come out of it, and without completely cutting in and reprofiling it, there's no way for me to really fix it. And I just never really wanted to.
And here's the other thought that in my head, if I had a thought. I know somebody's going to jump on that. But with the machete, like you said, you can keep it really sharp, and you can do feather sticks and stuff. But if you've kept it sharp, it really doesn't do machete good stuff really well. At least that portion. So now you have to have a varying profile angle as you go up the blade. An area where you keep it nice and sharp, and then an area where you have more of a utility wedge so that you can really pound on it without having to sharpen it every 5 seconds. So it is a good all-round tool, but like any all-round tool, it's not a superior tool in every instance.
And that's very true, and that's, like I said, that's kind of why I reduced down to the 2 other tools. I got a little better in both worlds. Just a couple comments coming here before they get too far behind us, or we get too far ahead of them, more specifically. Red Sand Adventures joining us. Have you ever tried chopping wood on your knees? Tried it for the first time this summer, and it worked really well. And funny enough, yeah, I actually do it quite regularly, unless I'm splitting massive wood with a splitting axe or something like that. If I'm processing around the campsite and it's fairly small wood, even my kindling and stuff here at home, generally I will kneel down and put the splitting block between me and the axe. That way, if I miss, it's not coming back to hit me. So it is actually a safer method of doing it. Also, for me, it's a little easier on my back. But it is actually a safer way of doing it. And there's another way where you lay a log down and log like this, and then the stick kind of going like that, and you split it on a cross section. Works really well for smaller wood, and once again, it's even safer again down that road. And if anybody's interested in that, there's some great videos on YouTube that shows you that. I mean, it's pretty straightforward, but if you want a more in-depth, definitely just search, kneeling splitting position, and you'll get a bunch of stuff on that.
And that brings up a really good point. Anytime you're swinging an axe, be aware of where that arc could bring that axe, because if
Peanut Gallery's back. Yes, my dear.
I was just gonna say that it depends on your comfortability and experience with the tool as well. Because I'm shit.
Why don't you just come over and say it louder?
Yeah, she wants to be part of this. Sit down.
Just come over and speak louder.
No.
So, capability experience with the tool also plays a large part, which we were touching on.
Yeah.
Shoot with an axe.
Because
Sure.
she sucks with an axe, is what she was getting at. So I apologize. Is there anything else you'd like to bring in?
Right now.
Okay.
So I started using an axe at a very young age. My first axe was a small hatchet, about the size of your small one, not your tiny one.
Yeah, like this one. This is a standard size hatchet right there.
Yeah, that's it was a
This
scout
is
hatchet. So I was given one of those and a job to split a whole bunch of firewood in the basement, and I spent a whole day down there splitting. It was awesome fun for a 6-year-old child.
Oh, goodness. Yeah, no, I was listening to you, Ben, but what Chris Lovelace just said.
Yeah.
Jump in the comments and take a look at that one before I say it out loud.
I gotta pull the YouTube up for that.
Okay, I'll say it out loud. Anyway, Chris Lovelace in the comments here. I remember my brother chopping wood with a fresh new hatchet he got. Not being careful, ended up almost slicing his unit off. 30 stitches on his pelvis. I mean, that is the reality, though. That is one of the things with an axe, and that's what Mel was saying with your experience and stuff like that. There is a potential to get hurt with one. And we mentioned that right from the get-go, because most people do assume that an axe has a lot more potential to hurt you because you're swinging it, it's less accurate. There's some basis of truth on that, don't get me wrong. But using things like the sitting position and stuff like that, you make sure there's barriers between you. There's ways to mediate that really, really well. And we have a new listener here, Walt Morgan, listening in Armada, Michigan? Did I say that right? Yeah, the dyslexic's the one reading the comments. We planned this out well. Anyway, sorry, continue on, Ben.
No, but now that he mentioned that story, I got to throw one in. All growing up, my grandfather had a crooked finger, and the fingernail had grown over the top of his finger. And the story we had always been told is he stuck his finger inside of a bottle, and his sibling, I think it was his brother, decided to help him out by cutting it off, breaking the bottle with an axe, and cut the top of his finger off.
Ew.
So things happen, right? I've seen a lot of people injured, and probably have minorly injured myself with an axe. I've had very few major instances with axes. I did cut myself with a chainsaw. That story has probably been told here before. And I have cut my hand with a saw. It is important to know your tool and know how to operate it. And when the option of cutting wood on your knees, the thing is there, when you swing an axe, you swing it at full arm's length. And if you follow that arc back with the short axe, where does it normally end? It's going to end somewhere in your shin or your foot. Now, it will make short work of most footwear. Even steel-toed footwear is not an overly great protection against an axe. And it can open up your shin or your leg or your foot relatively easily, the same as it can open up the side of a birch tree. I mean, it does its damage. It's what it's designed to do. So if you're using it without care, without consideration of what it's capable of, very well expect that you're going to get injured. It's a likelihood to happen. That being said, things can happen.
I'm just thinking, I don't think I've ever seriously injured myself with an axe. I have seriously injured myself with a saw. Both hand and chain.
So what I mean, we watched it on Alone. Multiple people got injured with axes. If you're not thinking about what can happen when you're swinging an axe, there's a good chance the blade could get deflected because once it goes in, you don't know what's inside. You don't know exactly what's going to happen inside of wood. Splitting wood can split. Putting that barrier between you, like a log between you and the axe, so if it does get deflected, it hits the log, or making the ground as a barrier to you.
Oh, it's far better to hit the ground and have to sharpen your axe than hit your shin and wish the axe hadn't been so sharp.
When I split wood, I try to split wood with a full axe. A full axe, if you swing it, is going to hit the ground before it hits you because it's already 3 foot long and your arm's so long, so it should hit the ground. But if you're using a woods axe or a scout axe or a hatchet, they're much shorter and they're going to come in. There's a similar theory with the machete. A proper machete, if I remember correctly, and I was told this recently, I think when you hold it your hand straight, the tip should be hitting the ground.
Yeah, and there might be some truth to that, to be honest with you.
So that Gerber one that you got there, that's really like a 3/4 machete, and there's a reason for that. And here's the thing: is I'm not as familiar with a machete. I've seen them, I've used them a little bit, but honestly, there's a whole proper process of how to use those, how to sharpen them. And I don't think a lot of people here in North America are as experienced with them as people in South America and maybe a lot of Asia, where it's a much more common tool.
No, and I would agree with you on that too. I was surprised to actually see the old wooden handle machetes for sale in a tackle shop, not like fish tack shop, I should say, horse shop. You know what I mean? You just don't see them often. Even the ones you get in town, stuff like that from Canadian Tire, like you said, you generally end up with these kind of ones.
Yeah. Which is really just a large knife, more so than a machete. The machete is a longer thing, and there's some heft to it because it acts like an axe. The heavy heft is allows it to carry through an object when you swing it. But there's the thing: is it's similar to an axe in that it's a momentum device, right? You spin, and that energy gets stopped, and it chips out large chunks of wood, or cuts clean through things in one swing, which is, in my opinion, less effort than a lot of sawing motion. You cut a lot of trees with the saw, you're going to get tired.
But I would almost argue it's more tired in a different way. It's a tired that you can recover from more effectively, I find, because it's more like a workout strain, as where with an axe, if you're doing it for a long period of time, it's impact strain. You run the risk, not the risk, your muscles tend to stay more sore longer because they have that jarring motion over and over again. So you actually end up doing a little bit more damage to the muscle itself instead of just fatiguing it. But once again, we're talking, like a day's worth of work on these things,
And technique plays a big part of it. A properly swung axe, you don't absorb the impact. You have stopped putting effort in by the time it hits. You shouldn't still be pushing an axe when it hits the wood. You're just guiding it at that point. And so that should help absorb it. But yeah, splitting wood especially, you get some jarring impact sometimes.
Oh, man. If you're splitting wood with the wrong axe, and we kind of already said this, but it's a point worth mentioning, there is a correct axe for the job you're doing. And when you don't use the correct axe for the job you're doing, as Ben was saying, like he used a full axe to split wood, that's generally where you're going to run into a lot of the problems and stuff like that. Using a hatchet, a lot of people use it to split kindling. And it gets you in close, you know what I mean? But you generally choke up on it. You try, much like your knife, you're maneuvering it in a way that's appropriate for that. But if you were trying to use, say, a 3-pound split maul to split kindling, the effort that it takes to try and hold it up, you're probably going to fatigue a little bit. Your hand might slip in the way. It might glance off and go into your arm. Like, you have to match the correct tool to the right job and have the experience, if not training, potentially on that tool. You know what I mean?
Look, we used to split a lot of wood. We split all our wood by hand. And I had splitting mauls and splitting axes for years. And the biggest one I ever had, I swear, was close to 10 pounds. And it had a steel handle with rubber wrapped around it. And this thing weighed a ton, and it took everything you could to swing it. But once it got going, not much stopped it. Like the odd gnarly birch might take 2 or 3 hits before it just pops right open. And I recently seen a place in Alberta was selling splitting swords.
That's kind of interesting.
Look that up later. So it's a sword with a deeper more 45 angle, and it was pretty cool. But you're right. Like there is a splitting axe and there is a cutting axe, and they're designed for them. And if you look at them, a cutting axe has a very thin profile. The cheeks are hollowed in, whereas splitting axe, they're hollowed out. They're kind of like puffed out versus sucked
To
in.
throw the
And
two pieces away.
right. So
More
a
of a
cutting
wedge to
axe
it.
is meant to dig in and cut out chips of wood. So when you're cutting with an axe, cutting a tree down, you're trying to take big chips out of the wood. So you want it to bite deep and then pop that wood out. So it's usually a cut high, a cut low, in two opposite angles, say about 45-degree meet to the tree, and you should be able to pull large chunks out. And it's like a beaver, how it eats. You chip out around, and eventually the thing will fall. A saw, wedging helps, but you end up cutting through the wood like the full length, maybe more than the full length, because if you wedged, you're probably in a third, and then out, and in 2/3. So you've cut through 4/3 of a wood.
No, and I can't argue that. Before we move on to saws, there is a question that Red Sand asked that I was hoping somebody would when we mentioned axes. I have an old double-headed axe or double-bit axe. I plan on restoring it. Do you guys know the reason for the double-edged? One edge is a bit bigger than the other one. So what do you think, Ben?
We just said it, really. One end is designed more for splitting, and one is more for cutting.
I'd have to see the axe. But, depending like Ben said, if one side is more wedge-shaped, then it's what Ben said. One is more for cutting, one's for splitting. If it's a solid, flat bit axe, it's narrow on both ends. It kind of looks like this axe just doubled up on both sides. What we used to call them was whining axes. I don't know what the actual name of them is other than bit axe, but we used to call them whining axes, and we'd keep one side for doing our chopping, and we'd use the second side for, like, if we had to cut a root or something like that. We had an edge that we didn't mind beating up a little bit and keeping a good one so it didn't slow us down, and we had that sharp edge to work with as we were going on. That's what I used them for historically when I was doing, like, crown lines and stuff like that. I don't know if that's the true nature of them, but that's why we used them in that purpose.
I think that the overall purpose was it was one tool that could do a lot, and adding those functions onto it helped. But I did read that somewhere. I did do some research. I think Wrangle Star actually has an episode on that.
Yep, Red Bear Tactical just said that. Wrangling Star has a video on that.
Yeah, and he describes it down. It's been a few years since I've watched it, but yeah, he has a good art, and he does a lot on axes. You want to know a lot about axes, he talks about them. They're definitely a useful tool. They're a tool you can use in places you can't use a saw, and you kind of mentioned it there too. When I've been doing some work, we've had to pull roots and stuff out of the ground. We always had like a grubbing axe, and by that, it was intentionally left dull. It was never expected to cut through trees, and we would hit it into roots. And the problem with that is you're going to hit rocks. It's going to happen. But no amount of trying are you ever going to be able to saw the roots off of a tree. But you can cut it with an axe, because there's no way you're going to get a saw in there.
No, and I completely agree. I was just thinking of something in my head, well, before we abandon axes, because somebody might mention this. There is another style of axe, and it's called a hoe axe or a Pulaski. Not a bushcrafting axe, folks. I'm just going to point that out there now, because I have had this question asked. Somebody carried one of these faithfully. And they used it for their own purpose, which wasn't the correct purpose of it. But what a Pulaski is for, it is an axe on one side meant for chopping, cutting, stuff like that. And on the other side, it kind of looks like a hoe. It's used in firefighting, wildland firefighting. It's for digging trench lines and things like that. But if you grab one for bushcraft, they generally are not going to do a lot for you. And like I said, I've seen it once, so I thought it was worth mentioning because I just got a slight chuckle out of it. I mean, you don't know if you don't know, you know what I mean? So I'm not making fun of anybody for this. Just don't learn from other people's mistakes, I guess.
Yeah, if you want to get into it too, there's a lot of different style axes. There's axes used for shaping wood. There's axes used for carving. And that's a thing I wanted to talk a little bit about. When I do some of my carving, sometimes I use an axe to hew a large amount of it off that I can do much quicker and precisely than I can do with a saw for certain functions. So they're two different tools. Now, the big thing I'm going to tell anyone with any tool is if it's got a sharp edge and you're not using it for what that sharp edge is meant for, that sharp edge should be protected. To protect both you and a sharp edge, there's a mask or a face or a cover that you can put over the top of an axe. You should always have one when you're taking an axe with you, especially if you keep that axe sharp and if you're carrying it.
If you want a real cheap cover for an axe, say like my hatchet here that doesn't have a case anymore, rubber fuel line or power steering line, cut that to length, split it down the middle and a ranger band around it, and you're all covered up for literally nickels.
I made one out of vacuum to like PVC pipe for vacuums, and I just flattened it down, heated it up with a hair dryer, got it nice and soft, shaped it in, laced it together a bit so it looked kind of neat. Put one piece of bungee cord through one corner to the next around the back, and it snapped it in place. There's a lot of ways to do it. Leather ones are relatively cheap at the hardware store, believe it or not. You can get them for $5 to $10. Definitely worth having. Same thing with your buck saw or your folding saw. When you're not using it, fold it up. Put it away. The Agua cannons fold up really quick and easy. You can unfold them. Don't go running through the woods with an open saw. We were taught this as kids, people. Don't run with scissors. Don't run with axes. Don't run with saws. I think it's equally useful.
So yeah, this is a prime example of a small saw. I wouldn't go use this to process firewood, but it works great for making traps and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Like figure 4, easy to knock stuff off and get precise cuts. But if you're not using it, fold it and protect it. Now, honestly, this one came from the dollar store, and I bought it to test it back when I was doing budget bushcraft, and I ended up keeping it because it works so well. So a couple comments there too, just to catch up. Red Sam was asking, so is the double bit axe decent axe to carry? 2 trains of thought on that. It's a great axe to carry. No axe is a bad axe, but you do have 2 sharp sides on that. So keep in mind you have double the chances of cutting your gear yourself and things like that, as well as if you got yourself into a spot, especially if you're splitting wood. Like I don't use a double bit axe to split wood because there's kind of a process to splitting wood where if you hit it once and the axe sinks in really hard, a lot of people try and pick it up and slam the block back down or they try and work to get their axe out. Depending on the angle that you can swing the whole thing around, flip it to the flat side of the axe and hit that on your splitting block, and it actually ends up driving the wood through the axe instead of the axe through the wood. Way less effort, and once you start getting used to splitting like that and stuff, you learn a rhythm, which you would not be able to keep with a double bit axe. So is it a good axe? Yes, great axe. Just once again, as Walt was asking here, what he's hearing is both are useful, but it is situational as to which you might use. The same thing goes with your axe. If all you're going to be doing is like cutting stuff down, double bit axe, awesome things to have. But if you're planning to do a little bit of splitting, you may want to consider something with a flat back on it.
Yeah, I wouldn't knock it as a thing. Personally, it's not my thing. My concerns are, you only have the one handle, so if you break it now, you have 2 tools that are basically failed. And like you said, there's an additional risk of damage. If I were vehicle traveling and wanted to just carry it with a vehicle, I'd be more inclined. I can't imagine a situation where a double-bitted axe would be great for light camping and hiking. They're generally big, and then you got 2 faces to worry about. I try to find a small forest axe.
I don't even bring a full axe. I bring a pole axe, which is about 2 feet long, maybe a little over 2 feet. But
generally, my camping axes are under 24 inches. 21 inches, I think I find to be a pretty nice length. And I have even taken the little axe like you have there, that fiberglass handled axe. I've taken the head off of that and put on a slightly longer blade or a longer handle, and I find that to be a fun little axe to play with. Yeah. Not that one. Yes.
Oh, you mean the other one?
Yeah.
Sorry. This one kind of has the same ABS handle in it.
Yeah.
You mean the hatchet, not this little thing. This little thing
Yeah, the
here
hatchet.
actually serves a purpose, and I did bring it because we use it kind of as a joke. But the thing is, great axe here for when you're trailing. It's perfect
Yeah.
for taking off little limbs and stuff like that just be annoyance otherwise. So Melissa actually has this for her belt axe. And yeah, if she's blazing a trail or something like that, or just scoring a tree to actually blaze a line, they're perfect for that because you can get them into small areas. You can work in around branches, and it's great. So this must have been the axe we were talking about changing the head on.
Yeah, I mean that's a common one. They're okay axes. They have their limitations, but I have put a longer handle on it and found it much better. Um, there are a lot of options out there for axes. There's dozens of designs. Definitely take your time and look at them. A really popular one used to be the roofer's axe.
Mm-hmm.
It has the ability to drop nails, pull nails. It's relatively lightweight. It's really good for making small splits, and you can keep a relatively good edge on it because it's pretty thin, so you can actually do some carving with it. So a lot of people find out to be a neat little one to play with. I think the end result is this. We've spent most of it on axes. Axe is a useful tool, needs to be treated with care. But we've beat up on saws, and I don't know that was fair either, because saws do have a lot of advantages. You can use a saw for a lot of things. Delimbing a tree, I've used both. The little saws, like that folding saw you had there, works really good. You can get it in spots, especially there's spots where you can't swing an axe, where you can get this saw, and vice versa. Places you can't really get a saw in without damaging it, you can use the axe. They both have times and places that come in handy. If you want to get really precise, or if you want to make, say, if you had to make a paddle, I've seen people that drew it out on a piece of wood and you saw it down with your saw, and then they chunk it off with an axe, and they can get that control even better. So there's a place where the two of them married together make a better tool.
And that's the thing. The other thing with saws are you can get them in a lot of different sizes. Like that's a tiny saw in comparison to my finger, but I use this a lot for when I'm making fireboards for doing friction fire because it's easy to put a notch in with that. You just cut two little notches, good to go. I've used it for cutting off shovel handles and walking sticks and stuff like that because I didn't want to dig out my big axe or my full saw or something like that. Saws, I find I use a lot when I am making traps, making shelter, making other tools, just because you have that finesse with the saw blade, providing you have the correct saw for what you're doing. You're not going to use this saw to set up, tiny notches in a fireboard. It's probably going to end up splitting it, especially if it was what am I trying to think here? A hand drill fire. Or this one that you gave me, Ben, which ends up being 24 inches long when it's fully assembled. You're not going to use that to set up a tiny little figure 4 deadfall or trap lever or something like that. Like, you got to tailor the tool to the job that you're doing. That's exact same as an axe.
Here's a nice little one. Silky pocket boy. I found it in Lee Valley. I don't know, probably about a 7-inch blade, give or take. I say that because I think I've seen 7 wrote on it somewhere. Yeah. But it's a nice little saw. Folds up, can fit it in your pocket, hence the name, Pocket Boy. Definitely has a time and a place for it. I like my saws. My Agua Cannon, I think we've talked about that. Everywhere I've taken it, people have liked it and most times somebody has bought one that I've gone camping with. So, it works really quick. It folds up pretty light. Saws generally will weigh a little bit less than your axe.
They generally pack better. They weigh less. And I don't want to say they're less dangerous. They take less experience to operate. You know what I mean? They're more directly forward. When you're felling a tree, you have to worry about angles and things like that. Even with an axe or saw, when you're junking a piece of wood for firewood, if you lay it on the ground, you pretty much just chop it until it files apart. But you have to watch out for your legs and make sure there's no rocks under it and stuff like that. With a saw, you can pretty much just saw down through it until your arms get tired. Because trust me, your arms are going to get tired several times. You can reposition things and still keep at it.
So yeah, I think the saw needs less initial skill to use. With skill, the saw can get pretty good, but the learning curve is a little bit better on it. An axe takes the skill, and here's the thing: if you're exhausted, So at the end of the day, if you're trying to do something with an axe, I think the risk of getting injured is a little bit higher than that of a saw because it doesn't take the concentration and skill to operate. If you're not on the game, it's easier to miss your target and it's easier for the axe to deflect and hit something else and damage something or yourself. Where a saw, you can really concentrate that in and get it down. You can't get a good cut without swinging the axe a little bit, but you can almost always put that edge on and get going. Now, will it jump a little bit? You'd be off a saw width or two. Yeah, it happens all the time. I don't know anyone who's never had that problem, but you don't miss by 4 or 5 inches, which I have missed on an axe swing by 4 or 5 inches.
Oh, easy. Especially if you're getting fatigued.
Don't tell me anyone who's going to split wood can tell me that they didn't miss by an inch or two on either side of where they aimed it to, or hit a little bit further, a little bit back, right? There's a lot involved. It's a full body motion to use that tool.
No, and much like yourself, saws have a really particular purpose. And depending on the size of your saw and stuff, once again, not to beat that dead horse. But as I mentioned, I like it for doing the finer cuts and things like that. If you want to do a tri-stick, do one with a knife and then do one with a saw. Learn a little bit about it. Learn what your saw is capable of. This little saw here is amazing for doing all those little notches and stuff like that. Now, if I was building a log cabin, I'd probably go with an axe and do bigger notches because they don't have to be as precise. But if that had to be real precise, maybe I'd crack the saw back out. And I guess that's the bottom line of this is I do find the saw a little bit more precise in the applications you use it in. I generally find the axe is better at doing a lot more quicker, if that makes sense.
I mean, most saws are crosscut saws. They're meant to cut across your grain. Axe splits along the grain really well. So if you're making splits and stuff, great. I have yet to see anyone make splits using a saw. Right? But
fair point.
And this is what I have seen, and I have tried this. It is possible to split a log without an axe.
You can do it with wedges.
Yes. So I have made, and I did it at the cabin. I don't know if I showed you or I talked to you.
We talked about it though.
But I had a piece of wood. It was probably about 20 foot long. It was probably 8 to 12 inches around from one end to the next. Maybe a little bit off from that, but it was quite big around comparatively. I mean, I'm now in BC. It's a twig here, but you know, decent size. It was a lot to lug that thing around. It was on the hill, and I wanted to see if I could split it. It had no purpose. It wasn't destined for firewood or anything. And I cut 5 or 6 hardwood wedges with a knife, and I went along with a log, which I could have easily using a saw made it into a better hammer. And I just tapped them in. I went up the length and just kept tapping them in. And I split that 20-foot thing without using an actual axe. So, you know, that's a neat tool. Like, you can do it. There's ways around it. People make splits all the time with their knife. You know, they baton it through, or they baton their machete through. Can you make splits without an axe? 100%. Is it as easy? Not really. Is there a risk to the other tool? As in, you will rarely damage an axe making splits, right? You could go a whole lifetime. You might change a handle. You might miss in chipping a blade, but you're not really going to, it's not beyond repair. If you baton a knife through a good piece of wood and it gets wedged in or the blade snaps off, the blade is done. There's no bringing that back at that point. So we've talked about this before. When you go into woods, 1 is none, 2 is 1. If you don't know that your knife can handle it, and it might handle it the first 20 times you do it, you may be without a knife.
No, and that is a very good point. And seeing we're kind of going down that path, let's talk maintenance on both things, because that is something we want to talk about. And you did mention handles on axes. The common place for axe handles to break is right here at the throat of it. Generally, you short shaft yourself a little bit or overshoot, whatever you want to call it, and you end up just smashing the handle on whatever that you're trying to split or chop. Generally, it happens more often when you're splitting than chopping, though it is not exclusive to that. I have seen some
Yeah.
people fatigued and stuff winding up with a big baseball swing and literally just sever their axe in two trying to cut down a tree. But generally, it happens over time as you're splitting wood. The wood splits weird, and like a little finger will stick up and catch your handle, and that's pretty normal wear and tear of an axe. As you get better with it, that happens less often. You learn to read the wood a little bit more, but at some point in your axe owning career or whatever you want to call it, you are probably going to have to change a handle at some point. So expect to do that. And there is a process to it, like profiling the handle to match the axe so that you get it balanced and that way it doesn't twist and glance off. And there's tons of videos on that. And I'm not going to profess that I'm an expert on it. I can basically make an axe that I can use. I don't know if I'd trust it with anyone else, but there is a lot to that. But there's a lot of great resources available online to teach you that as well.
There is. Grain direction tends to make a pretty big deal. You want the grain to be sort of, for lack of a better description, forward and aft to the, you don't want it going across grain. The other thing you mentioned, how it breaks off, the other way sometimes happens is when you're cutting, you wedge your axe in and you put a sideward load to chip that piece of wood out and you snap it off that way because that's the way the handle is its absolute weakest. And so it can't really handle great strain on that, and it's something to keep in mind. Yeah, so there is those things for sure. How do you protect your handle? A lot of people put a guard underneath the head, and it's usually just a piece of leather wrapped around it, so that when it hits, that sacrifices and takes the impact and damage rather than your wooden handle, and that's a good thing. I've also seen it made out of brass and steel and copper. So it's just a little collar that comes down from the head about 3 to 4 inches. Oiling your blade and your handle.
And oiling your blade on a saw is even a good idea too to keep rust down. So oiling can go for both tools here.
Yeah. Anything metal should be oiled regularly to keep it from rusting. If it starts to rust, the rust should be removed because it spreads like a cancer. Get rid of it. The handle, again, oiling that will help. Leather, if there's leather on any of your tools, make sure that has been treated with some kind of leather treatment to prevent it from drying out. If it dries and cracks, it's going to fail. Your face on an axe is oftentimes leather, like your protection. So that's important. Your head of an axe can become loose, but so can the blade of your saw. And so, like in this case, you can tighten down that screw. That tube saw you showed me,
yep,
that actually has a wing nut that you can adjust. And if you're using it for a while, sometimes you'll notice it gets loose. You have to tighten it up a bit.
On a saw note, spare blades. That is one of the beauties of a saw. There are significantly less maintenance in that aspect. With an axe, you have to learn how to sharpen, and there is a proper way to sharpen an axe, putting the correct angles and stuff like that on it, depending on what you want to do with it. With a saw, most times it's as easy as just buying a new blade for it. And we found out, this is one thing I was going to tell you, when Steve and I were together when we went camping, he got a 24-inch version of your saw, I think it was.
Yeah.
The blades will work in this saw. All you have to do is put a small nut and bolt on them.
Yes, but like that saw has plastic ends on it.
That's why you have to put the nut and bolt in the other one. They'll actually. Sorry?
I was going to say, if you put the nut and bolt on it, yes, I could see it working, but I feel like that would be putting a bit of an odd strain on the tube. And how long would it survive?
I was going to say, you have to make sure the hex side faces out, and you have to put a flat side in one of the screw heads. There's a whole tutorial on how to do it to spread it out. Because I went on a mad search to try and find replacement blades for that. You can't get them anymore. So a whole bunch of people started using the same blades using this method. So that's the other thing with a saw is generally if you need to figure something out with it, it's metal. You can work with it. You can make something work.
With a saw, it is worth more so than the body of the saw. Buying good blades. And if you go to Walmart or not Walmart, dollar store, you can often find times find bucksaw blades. Believe it or not, they used to sell these cheap bucksaws, and I went out and tried them, and almost everyone seemed to bind right away. And the reason is it's a flat blade.
Yep.
So there's a thing called setting the teeth, and setting the teeth is every other tooth should be alternating, one to the left, one to the right, one to the left, one to the right, and that means it cuts wider than the blade, and that's important because if it cuts the same width of the blade, it doesn't take much expansion of the wood that it all of a sudden it's grabbing your blade.
And keep
and
in mind,
friction,
wood is a fibrous plant. As it heats up, it's going to expand. And there is heat generated when you're cutting wood. Anybody that says there isn't, tell them to grab your saw blade after you run it through a piece of dry hardwood.
Yeah. So that friction, and you might say, oh, it's not that much. It is a lot. That friction wears you out quick. So anything you can do, and this is where lubing up that blade, like a little bit of WD-40 or a little bit of oil on the blade, will help you cut through that wood so much faster and prevent corrosion so much better that it makes a huge difference. But that offset, that setting of the teeth on a blade, on a saw, makes it a little bit wider, helps a lot too, because there is so much less friction and it makes cutting feel so much better. So those dollar store blades I found had no setting. But if you took like a screwdriver and you go in and you just set each one, there's a tool for it. You can get a setting tool. There's a whole art to this.
Yep.
It's going to make your experience so much different. Anyone who's used a cheap bucksaw and then a good bucksaw will immediately tell you there's a difference. And I think that was a big part. Those Agua cannons, they're sold with a decent blade. And they're sold with a blade that's meant for a purpose. So you can buy a meat blade. You can buy a blade that's meant for cutting through steel. You can put a hacksaw style blade on bucksaws.
Oh, yeah.
You can get cross cut as well as what's the other word? You can get there's cross cut. There's another word, and then there's green and dry wood blades. There's a difference. And,
oh yeah, for sure.
Using the wrong blade to cut wood is significantly more effort. You're going to regret it. I think that's the thing, both the beauty and the disadvantage of a saw blade is with the right one, it does make a lot less energy, a lot better. It's a little bit safer. With your axe, it's pretty well the same tool for everything. You know, like for cutting. Once you get down to if you want to make like a square piece of lumber, there's a proper axe for that with a flatter side and for hacking off stuff. There are specialty axes for splitting, but less so than.
It's called a kerf. The kerf is wider than the blade to accommodate the passage of the blade. So there's the proper name for the angle that's created by displacing the teeth. It's called a kerf. Kerf. Kerf.
Kerf, yes. Kerf also refers to the thickness of the blade too. So you can buy thin kerf blades.
Yeah.
And you'll find that even on like a radial saw or like a skill saw, like your circular saws. You can buy thicker and thinner blades, and they'll call it kerf. And then the offset is your setting. So a thin kerf blade is thinner and generally weaker, but wastes a lot less wood and takes a lot less energy to push through things. A thicker kerf blade is stronger and can take a lot more impact, like a lot more work, but takes a bit more energy to put through. So depending on what you're doing and your precision you want to get, choose the correct type of blade, right?
I was just reading our comments there. Sorry to catch up. Yeah, so we talked about oiling them. We talked about keeping them sharp. You can sharpen a saw, but most times it is easier just to buy a new blade. For this one here that I was just showing with Ben, I'm actually going to set the teeth and resharpen it by hand just to see if a new blade will work as good as the old blade. With both of them, it is pretty straightforward stuff. If it's damaged in any way, fix it before it becomes a problem. With both a saw and an axe, a chip in the blade of an axe, or it's gonna make it wander. It's gonna make it pull. It's gonna make it dig. It's gonna make it unsafe. Same as if you chip a tooth in a saw. Sometimes you will literally just chip a tooth off or snap a tooth off, whatever. It's going to make things worse for you. Just keep them working properly, and that's gonna aid so much to your safety. Keep them in cases when you're not using them, if you can, like some sort of case, just to keep them from being damaged. And we already talked about this. And honestly, that's the majority of the maintenance. Keep them oiled, keep them in working condition, and keep them protected. Almost any cutting instrument, that's basically it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this same theory works with your knives, your machete, your saw, your axe, all across the board. Like I said, if it's wood, oil it. If it's leather, treat it. Usually there's like a mink oil or Dublin. The steel, any kind of corrosion preventative oiling will help. Keep it sharp. Don't let it get hot. So do not heat up. Do not put your knife blade, your axe, or your saw in the flame.
You'll detemper it.
You'll detemper. And I don't know why I have to say this, but I feel I do, because there's somebody out there who's sticking their axe head into the fire because they think it's helping them cut through something.
Oh man, no, the worst one I ever seen for heating up stuff. And once again, just random story. We're coming to the end of the show, so I'm going to tell it. I watched somebody use the tip of their knife to help them solder something because all they had was a blowtorch. They couldn't use the torch directly on the wire, so they blowtorched. Like they took their knife, laid it on the wires, put the blowtorch on the knife, and used the solder, like kind of like heat transfer. And then they wondered continuously after that why that knife would never hold an edge again. They heated it up and let it cool down cool down slowly. It was summer, right? So instead of quenching it, cooled down slow, weakened the metal, realigned all the crystal. The thing was soft. Like you'd almost bend it with your hands by the time it was done.
Yeah. No. I mean, and it's not easy to properly ask any blacksmith. Like getting a good temper on a knife is an art in itself. And to think you're going to do it with a handle on it, like most knives are tempered just as a blade. They're put through the whole process. You know, they heat it up to a temperature, they cool it down, and then they put it usually in an oven to temper it down. Like so, there's they quench it and then they temper it, because if it's quenched properly, it's so hard it's going to shatter the first time you do anything with it. Like it's like glass, super hard, won't scratch, hold an edge forever, but put a slight bit of sideward pressure on the thing and it's going to shatter like a piece of glass. And you see them, you watch blacksmith shows, they'll drop them on concrete by accident, they'll shatter, they're gone.
Oh, for sure.
Right? And then they go and put them in the oven and they heat treat. And that's not shown on like Forged and Fire. They don't really show that process of tempering.
Yeah, because it's a few runs through the oven. It's not just one.
Yeah.
We had Jamie on one episode that you weren't here, and he talked about the tempering process, and he says he runs them through like 4 to 5 times, depending on what the knife is.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to get it soaked, the temperature soaked through, and then, there's a whole process. And even, before they do the initial quench, a lot of times they heat it up and cool it down, heat it up and cool it down. And the process of that is well regulated too, because doing it too much in a carbon steel blade will take the carbon out of it.
Mm-hmm. Doing it too fast in a steel blade could warp it.
Yeah, and if the stresses aren't relieved out of it, when you take it out, you'll have a piece of bacon is what you have, right?
So a big safety thing that Red Bear just said here, and before we go too much longer, it's worth saying is don't use a grinder to sharpen your axe. Don't use a grinder to sharpen any kind of cutting thing. It's you can profile it and cut shapes with it, but that's not supposed to be your final sharpening tool. And I see it happen a lot, especially with axes and machetes. People will take and use grinders to try and quickly put an edge on them. Same kind of deal. It makes a real rough edge, and it puts a lot of heat in there.
It does. My father, when I was younger, he started making knives, and what he did is he found these large hacksaw blades, like they were like 3.5, 4 inches thick, and wide and probably over an eighth of an inch thick. They were pretty thick, 3/16 or something thick. They were decent thickness. And he was using a bench grinder to profile it. And he literally had a bucket of water there, and he'd stick it in the water and cool it down, and then he'd run it through once or twice, and then back in the water. Run it through once or twice. I have had bad nicks in an axe, and I will take it to a bench grinder, an angle grinder, to bring it back. But then I got to sit there for a ton of time with various files, and then I'll go down to even like a sandpaper or a stone to get the edge I want in the end. So you can use it to get a start, but honestly, you can really mess one up doing it.
They're super aggressive.
Use it extremely sparingly, and if you don't know what you're at, take the extra time with the file. He's 100% right. You'll do a lot less damage and have much better control with a file.
And that's what he said. He said he uses a flat file to dress it up and then uses the stone to polish it off. Basically what you just said.
Yeah. It depends on where you've gotten. If I wanted to take my grubbing axe and return it to being able to be a felling axe, then I've usually got no edge left on this thing, and it's a process to get it back. I've also seen large nicks where somebody has messed up and hit, decided to split wood on top of a rock, and it's tempting. You're in a woods and it's full of like moss and stuff, and you're trying to split a piece of wood, and the only hard thing around is a big rock. You're like, I'll just put the wood on and hit it. It's gonna go through and it's gonna hit the rock, and you're gonna mess up your blade. You're much better off getting another big piece of wood and hitting against that. That's not always possible with an axe, but if you can at all do it, do it. If you put those kind of nicks in there, you may be there for a while with a you'll be wanting a good file, maybe something like 18 inches to 2 foot long. You can get a nice run
on it.
Because you're taking a lot of metal off now to get back to something that's usable, right? But yeah, with any tool, the axe is a good axe head probably can last you a lifetime. Rarely will you find a saw blade that's going to last you a lifetime.
My axe, my little axe that you see me use, I found that axe head in a field.
Yeah.
It wasn't too bad. Like, it was rusted a little bit and stuff, but I was able to clean it up, polish it off, and make a working axe out of it because it was a really good axe head.
There are people who will go to yard sales and antique sales looking for some of the older axes that were made 50, 60, 100 years ago and clean them up and reuse them because to them they're the best steel they can find, and they just really last, where a lot of them today aren't made as good. And if you watch Wranglestar, he's an interesting character. He had a hate-on episode for Fisker axes, which I have a Fisker axe. I like it. I think it has a place in my kit, but it has a relatively soft steel, and you can't replace the head on it. Like, once it's damaged to a certain point, it's garbage.
It's much like this one here. Not trying to deafen anyone with this, but it's like a molded handle into the head. So once it's done, it's done.
Yeah. Slightly different, but very much the same concept. And I think they have a good warranty. If you break the handle, I think they'll replace it. And they're hollow, so some people have broken the axe and just jammed a piece of wood in there to get them back out. So there's options. That being said, it's hard to beat an old-fashioned hollow head axe that you can put your own handle in and do it. And I have a couple that I've put together over the years, and it tends to be something that brings me a lot of joy to use. I'm happy to see it. I know how it works because I put a lot of time and effort into it, and they're always fun to use. But I love my saws too. So anyone that tells you that one is better than the other, I don't think they understand the function of either. Because if you knew the true function of each one, you'd know that they're both excellent at what they do. And combined, they really do make an awesome pair that you can do so much with.
And you said it right at the start. Aside from they both process wood, it's almost like comparing apples and oranges. They're made for two different kinds of processes, and they do their process very well.
Yeah. You can't really replace an axe with a hatchet or with a machete, and you can't replace it with a saw, no more than you can replace a saw with an axe or a machete. And a machete works where you couldn't really properly use an axe or a saw. You want to cut your way through a jungle with a saw? Good luck, you'll be at it all day. Um, Maybe the closest thing would be one of those, like the weed whacker type saw.
Hmm.
You know what I'm talking about? The brush saws?
Yeah, with
Those
the
are really good for going through the woods. They have a spinning, 12-inch blade, dangerous as hell.
spacing saw. That's what they're called.
Spacing?
Yeah.
Brush saw, I think I was told.
Yeah,
Anyways.
that's the other name for them. But if you go to buy one, they're called a spacing saw.
Oh, yeah. And, I mean, there's a harness you wear, and I think they say for 20-foot circumference, you want to stay away from it. But I've watched a guy with one of these. I think the one I've seen, they had 8-inch blades on it, and they cut through 8 to 12-inch trees.
Yep, you just go around the outside of them. We used to use them quite a bit in parks.
Yeah, they're a great tool for themselves. Again, not a bushcrafting thing in the fact that you're not going to walk 10 miles with this thing just to build a quick fort. It's great for trail making. It's great for clearing brush around a piece of property. It has a purpose. Same thing with, we never talked about chainsaws, really, because I think they're too big and bulky to be taking.
Mm-hmm.
Is there an exception? Car camping, yes. I've often thought of throwing a chainsaw in the back of the SUV in case I see a downed tree. But the reality is, for the number of times it's happened to me, my axe and saw would do it. So.
No, and just something that Red Bear mentioned here to the side, and it's related back to axes. His first Gerber axe destroyed the edge on moose bone. And then he said, a couple days with a bastard file and a diamond stone, it was better than new. Next bone never hurt, the next moose bone never hurt the edge at all. He said they might have screwed up the factory temper on the edge, and once he got rid of that, it seemed to be plenty good underneath. And that there might be something to that, because I've heard other stories about Gerbers and stuff like that, where once they've taken that initial face off, that initial edge off, that they've actually lasted pretty well. So it might just be something in their process.
I would wonder if that would be however they put the final edge on, if they overheated it.
And that's what I'm thinking, because a lot of times those go through a cut grinder. They just kind of go down a belt line, and it's two grinders that just V it down, and it's generating a lot of heat there, and it's just a real quick edge.
Yeah, and they would mess up the temper on the outer side, because generally a bad temper, you would end up with a case hardened thing. You'd have the opposite. Like, it might work really well. A lot of files are case hardened. They're hard on the outside, soft on the inside. And in this case, we kind of have the opposite, which tells me that something heated the edge up. And they may have even intentionally done that to help people keep a fine edge on it, like, to be able to sharpen it a little bit better. But yeah, once you get down to the true metal, it would work. It's interesting. I can see a few ways that could happen. But yeah, bone is hard.
Oh yeah, I've broken a good many knives, splitting deer.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, for anyone who's interested, my father was a hunting guide for over 12, 15 years or so. And the interesting thing is, when around the end, when I was chatting with him about it, he stopped using saws or axes to clean his moose, caribou, and bear. He did it all with a single knife.
Really?
Yeah.
That's kind of interesting.
He had one knife. I seen the knife. I wish I knew where the knife was. I suspect it's somewhere, but we can't find it. My mother doesn't quite remember it, and nobody else seems to know what happened to it. And I don't know if they're hiding it from me, as in somebody took it and doesn't want me to know about it, but I want the curvature of it. It had more of a curve than most knives. I found a couple that are similar to it. And he would get that tip in and then use the leverage to crack the ribs along the spine. And he would just, if you poke it into the joint just right, you can actually snap most joints open. So you cut those tendons and the joints will come apart. And same thing, skinned it. He kept the small diamond sharpener to keep a sharp blade on it. And he did the entire whatever they wanted, because there's different types of ways of processing meat based on how you want the hide and stuff like that. But he would quarter and skin and everything, completely process an animal.
I really wish I could have seen that process, be honest with you. Would have been neat.
Man, I seen it once, maybe twice, and it was pretty neat. He had it down to a science. There are definitely good guides out there that still do it that way, and he was taught by one. Unfortunately, there's some skills that are, becoming more rare.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Even in our industry, it's getting more and more rare for some of the older skills, but maybe that's a topic for another day.
Yeah. Okay, we've definitely shot our hour. That was not a hard thing to do, and I think me and you could happily talk about axes and saws and machetes and knives till the cows come home.
Oh man, this is a great. If anybody that ever goes camping with us, and Steve and Chris and a few other people can attest to it, you get us around a fire with a few adult beverages into us. This is a topic that we can literally go for hours and hours and hours, then take a break and come back and start fresh.
Then take a break and go cut a bunch of stuff up with our axes and saws and knives and come back and show each other what we were able to do quickly. But yeah, with time and practice with all these tools, what you can make gets so much better. And on my last trip, relatively quickly, and this is something, the last thing I want to say, and you'll have to shut me up and shut us off too, Robert, but a tool I want to start carrying is sandpaper. Because I whipped out a beautiful spoon in absolutely no time, but if I had a sandpaper, I could have finished that so much nicer.
Say that again?
I made a wooden spoon.
Yeah.
But if I had some sandpaper, I could have finished that so much nicer.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm thinking of adding a couple of sheets of sandpaper, a couple of grits into my kit, just so I can do some more fine work after I finish carving, because you can only do so much with a knife.
I'm trying to think what would work really good for that.
Sandpaper.
Yeah, sandpaper, but I find it whole other topic, but yeah, sandpaper ideally, but I was trying to think of something that might be a little more rugged.
I do have a 4-in-hand, which is a type of rasp that has a fine and a coarse, and a curved fine and coarse.
Yep.
And so it's 4 files in one. You just hold on it. And you can do a lot of really cool work with that. But again, once you get to a certain point, it leaves a rougher edge than you'd like for fine work. And a little bit of sandpaper, 5-6 seconds with sandpaper, and you can wear off those sharp edges and get rid of any flakes, and you can make a big difference.
And that's fair. What do you folks out there think? Do you guys have any ideas on that, or do you have any? Just smash my mic around. Do you guys have any comments, stories, something like that you'd love to share with us about the topic tonight on knives and axes? Saws and axes. You said that at the first, and for some reason it stuck in my head. But anyway, like always, if you guys have stories, comments, things like that, please feel free to reach out to us. A lot of you have up to this point, and it's awesome. We love talking to you. We get messages, we answer questions, we get some stories, we've met some cool people over it, so we really love that kind of stuff. Feel free to reach out to us. You can get it down there on the atlanticbushcraft.ca website. Contacts are there, the Facebook page, YouTube, all that good stuff. I think that's all of that. I try to squeeze that in the end of every episode.
Yeah.
Other than that, was there anything else you want? Any final thoughts for the topic tonight, Ben?
Tons, but I'm going to let them all go.
You told me to reel you in. That's why I threw that ending in there. But all right, folks, we'll see you next week. Thanks for joining us tonight, especially the new faces there, Walt, and I think there was one more, but I could be wrong. No, I think it was just Walt now that I get looking at it. But thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week. Same time.
Right on.
Night, everybody.